I start these interviews off, and they usually go the same way when we begin. And so I ask you, when were you inducted into, or became associated with the citrus industry? And I know the answer, but I want you to tell me anyway.
Yeah, so I guess I was born into it, actually. The legend is my great-grandfather came to Apopka, Florida in 1868 and planted citrus. And my grandfather was in it as well, and my father. And then growing up, my father was a manager and had groves of his own, some old family groves, and also was a manager for a large company at the time, Libby, McNeil and Libby, and then later he owned a caretaking service and took care of groves all over Central Florida. And so grew up in an orange grove, played in one from infancy, and just ended up going into the citrus business because I didn't know anything better than that, and I always enjoyed it.
You know, Jerry Chacon, among others, always liked to give me a rough time because I talked to people like you, and had a great interview a while back with Sam Sadler and Tom Hurlbert, and they got out of the citrus business, but they couldn't when they were young. And it's the same kind of a story, you know, from you folks who were born sitting in the passenger side of Dad's pickup truck. But it's always, I hoed trees in the summer. I toted portable pipe. I did this. And Chacon said, Jackson, you never developed character on the end of a hoe handle. I grew up in Orlando, you know. I rode a bike around the neighborhood, but I've learned how great it is to be a part of the citrus industry. But you grew up in it, and you were probably like a lot of the kids. When you were doing it, it wasn't exactly something that you really enjoyed doing, but it was just expected, and you did it. Summertimes you were going to be hoeing trees and doing different things. Was talking. Somebody was spraying. Oh, it was Dudley Putnam. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, you must have hoed a lot of trees. He said, you know, I didn't hoe a lot of trees. I ran the sprayer. And Dudley's, this had to be 50 or 60 years ago, that he put out summer oil spray, and he still has the wooden prop out of the old sprayer that they used. But anyway, so you end up working in family groves. Tell me about your dad. Your dad was an institution in the citrus industry. I knew him very well because I covered Orange County and everything else, and so he enjoyed citrus, and he was on the Citrus Commission and
yes, sir.
Worked for Libby's and everything else. So was he citrus 100% of the time?
Yeah, he had a foliage plant nursery because we lived in Apopka, and there's a lot of that there, and citrus, and of course he loved to hunt and fish, and that was his passion. And but he liked growing citrus, and you're right. From a very early age, I mean, I think I was 6 years old, and I heard about 5 o'clock in the morning and said, "Get up, boy, you're going to work." So it was on. Yeah. So.
You know, you did have an older brother, but you had two sisters in between.
Yeah, right. So I was pulling weeds in the nursery, and then graduated to the hoe hand out in the field and in the groves, and I remember we were installing irrigation, and I'm old enough to have used galvanized pipe, and I remember the year that PVC came out, and I thought that was the greatest invention in the world because to cut it and glue it together was so much easier than cutting 12-inch galvanized main line and having to thread it and put that together down in a hole 4 feet deep down in the sand hill somewhere. So
yeah, I can imagine two great inventions: PVC pipe and herbicides.
Yes, and herbicides. I remember the first time I put out herbicides with a little Herbie. It called a Herbie, a little hand wand thing with an atomizer on it, on resets instead of having to hoe those resets. So that was a big deal too.
Now, y'all had a grove in Holy Paw, right? Did you live there, or you just drive down there? What was your role in Holy Paw? Did you actually have that grove? Was it your responsibility, or were you just?
I was
just another
low man on the totem pole there. So my friend Johnny Land and I went there. I'd decided I didn't really like college, so I decided I wasn't going to go, or dropped out. And I think Daddy sent me to Holopal. That was that was boot camp, and so I did live there for a couple of years, putting in that grove, and was on the tree planting crew and the survey crew and the irrigation installation crew, and got to do it all down there. So yeah, most of the groves that we had in the caretaking business are around Lake and Orange counties growing up, and then did that big project in Holopal and decided, hey, maybe I should go back to school after all.
So, I was in college with a couple of guys that grew up and had good experience. Buddy Johnson was a good
Yeah.
friend of mine, and his dad was a caretaker, and so he knew the business. And from that perspective, when you went to Southern,
Mm-hmm.
and how big a program was it when you were there? I mean, it had to have been 50 or 60 kids or
Yeah,
so.
we probably had 60 people in the program then, and of course Thomas Mack and Dr. Pravat were there, and they were great teachers, and they got us out in the field. I mean, we spent a lot of time in the field and doing more practical. It was different than the University of Florida. I spent my first 2 years at the University of Florida, and of course that was more geared toward research and academic type stuff, and of course we had that too at Florida Southern. But he got industry people to come in and teach various classes. We got to go to packing houses and processing plants and fertilizer plants and spend time in the groves, and so it really was really good training to be in the citrus industry.
Well, you were in the industry in
Yeah,
Lakeland. I mean,
exactly.
It was a little hike from Gainesville to get in.
Right.
In fact, I went to Gainesville, and the best class that I thought we had at Gainesville was a class that Al Cresdorn taught in the summertime. And it was here at the experiment station at Lake Alfred. And in the morning, we'd hear a lecture from John O'Bannon about nematodes. And then in the afternoon, he'd take us out and show us his experiments, and we'd talk about it. And that was the first time you really got into a grove when you were at Gainesville. They had a little research planning up there, but it wasn't much of anything at all. So I gather since your early first years, you were not in the classroom and in the library all the time. You had a good time at college, but after your experience in the field, I guess that when you went to Southern, it probably opened a whole lot of new different avenues for you to explore.
Yeah, I had a lot of practical experience, and was able to do well there and contribute in the classroom. And of course, the industry was booming back then, so there were plenty of jobs when I graduated, and that was a good thing.
So where did you end up after? What was your first non-family job then?
First non-family job was with Coca-Cola down in their citrus nursery and on Twitty Road there south of Sebring and north of Lake Placid. And I had several job offers. I had a job offer at Haines City to be a bug checker, and then with Hugh English down at Duda, and then with Jack Norris and Max von Hamann at Coca-Cola. And I didn't know what the best job was. I ended up flipping a coin. My wife hates this story, but I flipped a coin, but it was between Duda and Coke, and ended up going to Coke. So that's how I made that decision.
And you started off in their nursery.
Yes, yeah.
So how long were you with Coke?
I was only there a couple of years, and was in their nursery, and then also in a grove in Frostproof, take care of a grove there as well, and then went to work for Bill Becker over in Fort Pierce, and so they had some groves and a juice plant there, and went over there to be a grower there for him.
So in nursery now, you're in a grove, and how'd you get involved with Evans then?
Well, I worked for Becker for about 12 years, and then there was an opening at Evans, and interviewed there, and just had an opportunity to move there, and did, and worked there for 30 years. And so, but both those, actually all three of those jobs, those were big growers, all three of them, and and I had a good experience at all three places, and had good people to work for, and good people to work with, and so I actually enjoyed all of those.
Well, I know that having grown up in the Groves and knowing what it was like, that you weren't the kind of guy who was going to end up being in the office shuffling papers and everything else. You probably wanted to spend as much time in the Grove as you did any place else.
Yeah, I was lucky. So the jobs I had, it was probably 75% field work, 25% office work. So that was great for me. I enjoyed that, and I really just enjoyed the whole choreography in the morning of just everybody showing up and clocking in and just firing up the equipment, getting tractors headed out and handing out spray work orders and calibrating fertilizer machine rigs, and I just enjoyed that, just the camaraderie of working with the crews and just planting trees and getting things done, and growing crops and getting them harvested. So I enjoyed all of it.
When did you become interested in or start delving into more than just getting crews out? You had to have been attending meetings, and you had to start asking questions and looking into the research and
Yeah, so I was always interested in that, and I remember you mentioned Dr. Kresdorn. I remember being in the back seat, when I was that tall, with Daddy driving and Dr. Kresdorn in the front seat going out. He had some research projects he was doing in Clearmont on some of the groves Daddy was managing, and so I remember that, and was always interested in that. So yes, I was in the Production Managers Association and in the Citrus Nurserymen's Association, and took a class here at Lake Alfred with Dr. Albrigo, where we were doing some higher learning and actually critiquing research projects, and actually learned a ton from him, and that's where I first learned that even though there's a lot of good research in the world, there's a lot that's poorly done. If it's a poor design, you're probably going to end up with a poor result, and just because they made a conclusion, it wasn't necessarily so. And he taught me how, in that whole class, how to pick those projects apart and those papers apart, and find out what their strengths and weaknesses were. And so that really helped me later on in life, when I was more involved in research and research funding, and trying to make good decisions about which projects deserved to be funding and which ones did not.
Yeah, I like to say that there was relevant research that went on, and then there was promotion research that went on,
Right.
for lack of a better term.
Right.
And just because it was a refereed publication didn't mean that the results were relevant or had any impact on the growers. And it was frustrating. We can talk about the various researchers, and it was interesting. We talked earlier today to Tom Thayer, and he was commenting on how Bob Koo helped him with irrigation. Mm-hmm. And when I start thinking about relevant research, Koo's got to be at the top of the list. Mm-hmm. Here was a guy that wrote the booklet, wrote the publication on fertilizer and irrigation, and what he did it was certainly accepted in the scientific community, but more importantly, what he did made a difference to the citrus industry as far as what you fertilize with and how much and when you irrigate it. So, it's like anything else. So when you get into it, you kind of get an understanding of what's relevant, what's not, and what's going on.
And working at Coke, they had a research department there, and Fred Beislein was and they were doing a lot of research, and I was in the field doing the research for Fred, and so I got interested in that, and I've started off in college going to the Florida State Horticultural Society, and really enjoyed that, and enjoyed reading the papers and then talking to the scientists, and I was always trying to find a way to do it better or cheaper or get a better crop, and that was the avenue to do that, to try to figure out, what other people had figured out and what new technology could bring to the table. And so I was just always interested in learning that. And everywhere I worked, my bosses would encourage me to go to these various meetings and participate in industry-related organizations. Again, if you just can bring one thing back and multiply it out over 10 or 20,000 acres, it makes a big difference.
Well, I'm sure that you learned a lot from your dad, but the one thing that I see in that your dad was a people person. He loved to interact with folks and always was a delight to be around. And I'm not sure, but did he go to the same place for breakfast every morning?
Yeah. All the old timers in Apopka, and they either worked on they were either growing corn on the muck, or they were growing nursery plants, or they were citrus growers. They all met at this. It was a drugstore that just had a little fry cook there, and they met there for breakfast. About 5:30 every morning, and just swap stories with each other and shoot the bull. And he was very social, and in that way, and so he was good to people. And one thing I learned from Daddy more so than anyone else was how to work with people in the field and work with the crews. And I learned most of what I learned was actually not from Daddy, but from the people that worked for him in the field, and because they had done these things their whole lives, and they might not have known the scientific terminology, but they made the observations and they understood what was going on, and they would explain it to me, and they knew, and they were right, and it made sense. And so I really just learned how to be a good grower, and learned how to get things done with the crew, and how to explain things, because they taught me and explained things to me so that I could understand it and actually get things done. So that was, I enjoyed that part of it.
Those are some valuable lessons, little things like when you realize that if the philosophy is you're working with me rather than you're working for me, it's amazing how much more productive things become, isn't it?
Yeah. Talking about being on the end of a hoe handle, I mean, the first thing they did every morning was sharpen that hoe with a big file. And if you use a dull hoe, it's a lot harder work than if you got a sharp hoe.
Yeah, it's a lot of those lessons, and you're obviously a people person. You enjoy interacting with folks and getting out there and asking questions and getting involved. Talk about those guys having breakfast. Who are some of the more colorful guys that you remembered? Tell me about Bob Pittman.
So Bob Pittman, he was a famous football coach, and I think he played 3 sports at the University of Florida back in the 20s, and coached some championship football teams at Bartow High School, and had a citrus nursery in Apopka, and had some groves, and was probably the world's best red snapper fisherman, and went fishing with him many times, and we loaded the boat most of the time.
Henry Swanson told me a story. He said I went out with Bob fishing, and whenever Bob did anything, it wasn't halfway.
It was wide open.
So he had his boat, and even then he had the navigation equipment, and he'd maneuver around until he had the spot. He anchored up, and Bob said, "Okay, put your line in here." And everybody put their line. They're pulling up fish, and Henry's fishing off on the side of the boat, and Bob said, "You're not going to catch any fish over there, Henry." Henry said, "When I put my line behind the boat, I finally got to the point where I just couldn't pull up anymore. I just couldn't catch another fish." But evidently, when Bob would go in, all the commercial fishermen wouldn't know, "Where do I need to go tomorrow, Bob?" And he outfished all the commercial people.
He did. He was good, and if he would anchor up, he would know where to anchor, and if we were just 10 feet off, he'd make you pull that anchor up and re-anchor, and I remember one day we were fishing, and he came down off the flying bridge just one time. He put a pinfish on, dropped it to the bottom, set the hook, pulled in a 50-pound grouper, and then climbed back up to the flying bridge.
He liked to watch everybody else catch the fish, didn't he? And once you shook Bob's hand the first time,
Ooh.
then you were ready for the next time. Because
right.
if you weren't ready, you were on the ground on
That's
your knees.
Right. Yeah, he was a character, and he really enjoyed
Now,
times with him.
I'm sure this story is probably true, but you can't be positive. But I was told that Bob had finally gotten to the end of his rope with people stealing gas out of his wind machines. And that he decided he was going to put an end to it. So we rigged up a deal with a stick of dynamite, so if they got out there, it was going to go off. And the word got back to Dave Starr, the sheriff in Orange County, and he paid a visit to Bob and said, Bob, let me take care of the thieves because I don't want you to.
That's right.
I don't want to have to come get you because of this operation. So I don't know if I think Bob removed the stick of dynamite, but I wouldn't want to get Bob upset with me. What Bob should have done was, and as we digress a little bit, he should have gone and talked to I can't remember the guy's name in Umatilla. Anyway, there was a grower in Umatilla that had the same thing going on, and he said, I got a better idea. So he went out and buried a 55-gallon drum of gas that had 50 pounds of sugar in it, and had the pipe coming up and cut and hid the access to the wind machine. And sure enough, they came along and sucked 50 gallons of sugared gas out. And then about 3 days later, he got Doug Sewell, the sheriff, and they drove down through Saltsdale and saw all these cars up on blocks and motors out and everything. That was the last time he had to worry about gas being taken out of a wind machine. So anyway, there were some other people in Apopka that you can remember, that were.
Yeah, some of the nursery guys, Jack Christmas and my uncle Raymond Hogshead, Bunny Hogshead, and there's just a lot of characters. Fred Odom, he worked with my dad. I learned a lot from Fred Odom, and he told a lot of great stories. And he'd say, "Yeah, see this wrinkle I got here in my forehead? That's really not a wrinkle. That was a beer bottle that's broken over my head in the bar."
But there were some fantastic people, and Bill Matthews at Plymouth Citrus Growers was always. I enjoyed talking to Bill quite a bit, and the crew that was there, and Bo Lester lived out and changed the thermograph out on Lester Road. It was always cold as hell out there. Yeah. And what was it at your house this morning, Bo? Well, it was 19, and you had that camaraderie and everything. It was I don't know if other industries are like this, Peter, but I was always amazed. We'd have a meeting, and at breakfast, there was no secrets. I mean, if you got a problem, you talk to somebody, and they didn't mind telling you, I found out if you did such and such, it worked for me. And which had to be,
Yeah, everywhere in Florida, everyone had that restaurant where everybody met in the morning for breakfast or met for lunch.
Or you went to Jack's for lunch, right?
Yeah, and you're right. They would share information and the grower meetings and production manager meetings and things like that. It was all about sharing information. So that was normal,
Yeah.
For
you didn't need an HR department to know it, because if someone said, I thought so and so worked for you. Yeah, but I wouldn't have him around again. He does this well, and so
right.
you could find out what was happening. Well, it's been you suffered through the freezes, and I guess one of your mandates was to find an alternative crop. Is that how you got involved with Pongami? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, of course we all came back from the freezes. Yeah,
I guess it was greening that put you in Pongami.
Yeah. So of course the freezes changed everything in Orange and Lake counties, as you know. And Daddy told me if I wanted to stay in citrus, I needed to head south. So that's what I did. And we did good. We thought canker was bad, but it really wasn't at the end of the day. And like one of the pathologists here told me that, canker was a common cold and greening is liver cancer. And so then we got greening, and we were concerned that we at Evans Properties that we weren't going to get out the other end of it. So we started looking at alternative crops, and it's hard to find an alternative crop in Florida. So our soils are relatively infertile. We're too far north for truly tropical plants, and we're too far south for temperate crops. And citrus did well for 500 years, and there was a reason there was so much citrus in Florida. It did do well. But finding a replacement that would work biologically, here in Florida, and then also have a market, big enough to to sell into is just a hard thing. I remember the company I was working at, we had 12,000 acres, and if we had gone to blueberries, that would have been 4 times more acres than there were all blueberries in Florida. You wouldn't have been able to sell them all. Kind of the same thing with strawberries or some of the other crops that just wouldn't scale up. So we were looking for something that would scale up. We planted some eucalyptus just for the local mulch market, and we worked on this Pongamia, which is an oil seed tree, because the oil market and the protein market, it's basically soybeans on a tree. So those markets are huge. They exist. You had a big enough market to sell into where you could scale up. I mean, it didn't do our company any good to have something that would work at 100 acres or 200 acres. They needed something that would work on 10 or 20,000 acres. So that's what we were trying to work on. And Pongamia is still in play. There's that company that I was working with, Terviva. They have operations in India and Australia and Belize and Florida, and
they must have one in Hawaii.
And
I called you one time. I was in a Popka, and I went to Porky's Barbecue.
That's right.
And I was leaving there, and I said, I need to call Peter McClure and tell him I just had a great barbecue in a Popka. He's probably been there. And you answered the phone and said you were planting a tree in Hawaii.
That's right. So their sugarcane industry kind of collapsed in Hawaii. So they had 300,000 acres of good land, great land. I mean, some of the world's best soils that was available, and they still had some infrastructure, irrigation and things that was available. And of course, here in Florida, we had, several 100,000 acres of previous citrus groves that was available. So part of the thought process on planting Pongamia was, if agriculture's working in a location, that nobody was going to convert over to Pongamia because it was new, but places where that were, ag was distressed or where they lost a crop, and it would grow biologically. That's what we were aiming at, and Hawaii happened to be one, and Florida happened to be one. So yeah. Anyway, that effort is still going strong, and they're scaling up to have enough product to get into the markets. It makes a beautiful oil. You can make biodiesel. You can make a table oil. You can make protein isolate out of it. So so I enjoyed. I did that for about 10 years and really enjoyed that. And I'm working at the Department of Ag now, and I'm enjoying that. So I've actually been lucky to have work in various places.
Well, this alternative crop deal, I had a little planting at Concert that the city let me have 10 acres to try to find an alternate crop. And when you look at it, in Florida, we're really farming the weather here.
Right.
And so you got to find a crop that maybe can't be grown other places because of the climate, environment, and then you got other crops that might not have enough chill hours and so forth. But there just hasn't been one that is going to replace the volume of citrus that's out there, and so it's kind of difficult time now to see what's going to happen, and you see some growers who are hanging in there and everything else, and we just keep waiting for the solution to greening. But I enjoyed some of the alternate crops, and you get to meet some people that are rather remarkable in the fact that Wayne Sherman at Gainesville was a deciduous fruit breeder. And Wayne grew up in the Delta in Mississippi, and was Mississippi State graduate and everything. But he had a real affinity and knowledge to with propagating deciduous fruits, for example. And some of the most marvelous peaches you've ever eaten. They don't shoot very well, but great backyard peaches. And we got people now up in our area that are growing these peaches and you pick and everything, and they're kind of coming back, and there's a resurgence. And the younger growers are now figuring that direct marketing is a good way to go. And so we're seeing more. Let's take advantage of the urban community relatively close by, so you can go to a farm and pick blueberries or strawberries or peaches, and your kids can ride the water slide, play on the swings, and it's a really great outing and everything. So, we've been struggling with greening. We've been trying to get it, and I told you earlier, and you realize that Lake County produced twice as much fruit as the state of Florida did in 1980. So, in your crystal ball, are we gonna find a way to live with greening, or are we gonna, where are we going?
Yeah, it's a very tough battle. Now, there's a lot of good things coming down the pike. It looks like these trunk injections are working, and the CUPS programs are working. The world's changed, markets have changed, competition's changed, so we'll never have 800,000 acres again. And if we did, we probably wouldn't get the labor to grow it and harvest it. But I think my own personal belief is there will be a citrus industry in Florida. It's just going to be different than what we were used to for a 80-year period of time, where it was very successful and kind of a dominant industry in Florida. But it's going to change, and it'll be different, but there will be an industry.
Yeah, the encouraging thing, Peter, is that there's still some younger folks out there who are willing to be the Don Quixotes and take up the sword and spear and tackle the wind machine and seem to be hanging in there. And, I found during my career that many times, I won't say most, but a large number of times, you have a problem, and a couple of growers or somebody stumbles on or has this idea, and lo and behold, it works. And of course, in our area, as you know, you grew up worrying about what was going to happen from the 1st of December to the end of February, and freezes were always a tremendous problem. And the engineers pointed out that water is a great tool to protect crops. And so in 1962, a few growers decided, well, we're going to put this theory in the operation. We're going to run our irrigation systems. Of course, they were overhead irrigation systems, and the sprinklers didn't turn fast enough. And if they didn't freeze up, they built up an ice load, and they killed trees. And all of a sudden, scratch off water. This isn't going to work. And then when it got to the point where it was costing you $700 an acre to fire up 70 heaters per acre with number 2 diesel, that doesn't look like the solution. And then somebody like Nick Farina comes along and says, I think we can use water, but we're not going to protect 43,560 square feet. We're going to protect this little cone around the tree and the scaffold limbs. And now all of a sudden we've got a problem. We've got a solution to the problem. But the scientists then can come in, well, here's how this works. You have 1,700 or 750 BTUs of heat of fusion and blah, 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 and it works. But, I've been always amazed at how growers can be so innovative and look at things and come up with solutions. And just like you said, I bet you that there are a lot of these guys that work in the groves that said, Mr. McClure, what if we did this, and you say, hey, that might be a pretty good thing to try, and we go ahead and do that. So not saying that growers are going to find the solution, but they're trying enough different things, and they're looking at things, and we'll see what happens. So I don't know, but to me, I believe that there's so many people who are still committed to citrus that they're going to work at it. They're growing citrus at Lake Yale. They're growing citrus back in the Umatilla and other areas.
Up
and so
North Florida, South Georgia, yeah.
Yeah, I went with Charlie Russ to meet a grower up in Valdosta, and this guy was growing camellias, and he was grafting camellias for some particular thing, and I actually saw some pecan orchards they pushed out and planted sugar bells in. So, but I guess in the 30s they had a kumquat queen in Monticello, and they've been growing satsumas for quite a while up there. So growers are pretty creative, and they can come up with an answer. Well, the biggest area that I want to talk about, we got to wait for Jerry, because I want us to talk about your interest in research, and you made a lot of fantastic contributions, but I think that one of the major contributions is that you were a translator, and you could translate research into Bubbanese, and so all these Bubba guys, you said, let me explain to you what this guy's really saying, and I was at enough meetings that I always enjoyed that. So we're going to save that for another time. We're going to talk about the box tax. We're going to talk about CRDF. And we're going to talk about how funding for research has changed and where we're going with that, because I think it's a very important story that needs to be told. But as I've said time and time again, it is so enjoyable to sit down and get people's history and stories and everything else. And I'm always amazed at the perseverance that people have and the creativity that people have, and I'm learning all kind of wonderful things. So we're going to wrap it up before we get going in that direction.
Okay.
We can go home. Thank you.
All right, appreciate it, John. We'll talk when we get Jerry here. And
you're a new grandfather now. We can talk about grandkids later.
Okay.